Okay, hello everyone, and good morning to the fourth day, I understand. It's Thursday now. No, it's the fifth day of negotiations. Um, and I can tell you that this is crazy exciting. Woohoo! Kind of. So basically, what happened is that yesterday negotiations kind of dragged on a little bit into the afternoon, and there didn't seem to be so much clarity about which direction we would go. But I can definitely update you that Dr. Negotiator had a big influence on the talks yesterday, and I'll let you in on what happened there just a little bit later. But basically, in a general kind of sense, the negotiations were talking about ways they can possibly move forward, ways they can possibly start to take this text and get it streamlined, and that's kind of you had a great summary of that in not only in the Daily Tick but in Earth Negotiations Bulletin, in the Eco as well. There was some good analysis of that. At the moment, this morning we had a great session on Workstream 2, and there was also informals that were a little bit unsure about what happened in there on continuing on the streamlining discussions. So I can tell you that in Workstream 2 this morning, it was convened to discuss a pre-2020 ambition. The meeting opened with a call from parties to stay on the agenda points. So they weren't discussing Workstream 1, but we're trying to focus on Workstream 2. However, there was a bit of a kind of agenda fight at the start of it, and a lot of people were talking about Workstream 1 and complaining about talking about Workstream 1, and there started to be a bit of a confusion. Then when they started to get onto the Workstream 2 discussions, there was what Mali called a bit of an implementation crisis that was under discussion. Um, China and India were very critical about this. They later confirmed that ambition had been kind of put in suspension, and there was just a general kind of big complaining session about pre-2020 ambition and how it hasn't been properly fulfilled. Bolivia was talking about the Kyoto Protocol. Nicaragua was saying things like, I don't want to be repetitive, but we see this as a lost decade. Developing countries are doing more than they actually can, and developed countries are not. We then got into a discussion on GCF, public versus private finance. Not surprisingly, EU, New Zealand, and Australia were very, very proud of all of the private finance that's coming in. I find it interesting that EU, New Zealand, and Australia are taking credit for private finance, but they were talking about how we can open up the discussions within the UNFCCC to start to account for all the private finance that's flowing in, and that was kind of a lovely little way of saying that they don't plan to give enough private finance that developing countries are calling for.
Public
And
finance, yeah? They don't plan
yeah,
to give enough they don't, okay, thanks.
yeah, and Norway was behind that as well. Ironically, Norway being behind that, considering that earlier this year there was news that Norway's kind of sovereign wealth fund made everyone in Norway a millionaire. Um, but then there was obviously a lot of callback from India, from Mali as well, who was speaking on behalf of G77 in China, talking about backsliding. India called the 10 billion that's been raised as nothing to be proud of, and that it was merely kind of opening the floodgates to further backsliding, and that we just kept reasserting the $100 billion per year targets, and that was kind of a key message of developing countries this morning, and unsurprisingly. So, as you can tell, all of those kind of updates were not really very much different to things that have happened in the past on finance discussions or on ambition discussions in the pre-2020 period. However, to give a light note, and something that happened yesterday afternoon that I only found out about last night as I was given a proper debrief. So Adopt a Negotiator partnered with some medical students, and we published a piece about health in the negotiations. And since then, we discussed some strategies about how they can use that article to the best of their extent. Now, what we then found is that, so we discussed printing out the article. So they printed out the article, and the medical students got to handing that out yesterday. They handed it out on the front couple of rows of the negotiating halls even. And then as negotiations were trying to figure out whether they should dive in or not, the UNFCCC's favorite fiery femme fatale, got up on her platform, not got up literally, but started talking about how we need to start negotiating. We're not kids. We know how to negotiate, and we haven't had a word of negotiations yet. And then
You're talking about who?
Claudia Solena.
Okay, from Venezuela. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Fatale from started saying we start getting into it. And then she said, for example, look at this paper on my desk that we've all been reading as we walked in. This is all about health, and health is an issue that's non-controversial to anyone. I don't see why it's not just straight away included. Why don't we just get to issues like this and start talking about how important these issues are, and then move on, and we can start working from there. So that was a great little kind of win. Previously, Venezuela had not supported health inclusion in the text, and the health inclusion came from Switzerland. So there's a bit of a cross-grouping collaboration that happened, but that was just a lovely little moment that I heard about yesterday, where AEN had a small but kind of nice little effect on the talks through something that we wrote. So that's pretty cool. And now you'll find that those medical students are kind of again on the tack and trying to push the health angle. At the moment, we're not kind of at the stage where things are getting added or subtracted, but we're just about to start. We're just starting an ADP session that's starting to again discuss the streamlining, and I think everyone here is hopeful that that if we can't get progress, at least then we get some clarity on the way forward, because definitely that clarity is missing at the moment, and I'm sure that's kind of things that are going to be very important. So the Geneva text will be published tonight at 8 p.m. and that will have attributions. So that will be a combined text of all of the different sections that have been that have been put out individually. And you'll notice that last night there was a slight variation to the sections. There was revision sections that were put out in mitigation, finance, adaptation, capacity building, and timelines. And we did a little bit of an analysis of that, of all of those papers, and basically it just highlighted that just throwing LMDC a bit of own and adding a few paragraphs that weren't in before. Nothing too controversial, as all of these paragraphs at the moment are kind of open to negotiations and haven't necessarily been written in concrete, but there was definitely a little bit of a change to the papers last night. And it seems like tonight we've been promised an annotated, not an annotated, a paper that will highlight who said what. So that'll be a lot easier for negotiators to be able to kind of talk to people and compromise. On the other hand, it will also be very easy for negotiators to start drawing their battlegrounds around other parties that they don't like once they figure out exactly who said what. So yesterday in the negotiations, we saw Venezuela, Colombia, and Tuvalu, and then again this morning we saw Tuvalu talk about not wanting a paper that highlighted who said what, because they wanted to kind of get this idea of this is a communal paper and this is everyone's pieces and we should work collectively to figure it out. So that's an interesting little negotiation procedure dynamic, but it seems like we're going to have that paper tonight anyway because of a large number of other countries who are interested in it. So that should be the dynamics for today. There should be the most interesting session of the day is currently happening right now, so we'll get a bit of updates from that later on in the day, and I'm sure you'll see them from our trackers and from our daily tick as well at the end of the day. You'll also see that Denise is about to publish a lovely piece on gender and the way gender has kind of been developed here, and that'll be published on Adopt Negotiator and IPS quite soon. And there's going to be some other pieces there on mitigation on Workstream 2 this morning, and a piece on divestment as well. So there's going to be some nice things to read on Adopt Negotiator as well. So I'll pass it over to you guys. Hopefully that was a nice little wrap, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions now.
Thanks, Chris. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about the workstream two conversations. So I read about the sort of chair's attempt at sort of clarifying the day, and then countries sort of um, jumping back and saying, "Oh, whoa, why are we talking about the stuff that's outside of the agenda or whatever?" And then I definitely heard about the sort of issues that countries thought were problematic, kind of in a but none of it really seemed to point towards uh, what's going to kind of what we learned from workstream 2 in this session. So we heard that there's, I guess, things that we maybe already knew were emphasized, like the commitments to the Green Climate Fund are lower than they should be, and there's still some questions about whether they'll be delivered, given countries sometimes have to get approvals by their parliament or whatever before those funds are released. And so so that's uncertain. We heard about the Kyoto Protocol second commitment period, which is uh, pretty far from ratification, and so that's kind of uncertain. So we heard a lot about like things that are sort of problematic and ongoing. Um, did did And then we heard interestingly from Brazil, and I
Yeah.
couldn't quite make this out, that they didn't want to sort of strengthen ties between like other institutions. If I understand that correctly, I might not be understanding that correctly, but and there was some confusion about um, a lot of the discussion in that sort of work stream are how do we link climate action that's going on maybe outside of this process to this process and try and create like a virtuous circle somehow, or use that to boost momentum, or use this to boost that momentum. And it almost seemed like Brazil was saying explicitly that a lot of the suggestions to that end were bad ones. And then the chair seemed to suggest that there were potentially implications on even civil society engagement. So
Yep.
I don't know. The whole thing kind of left me, I guess, a bit confused about where we're headed on workstream 2. Have you heard any more that sort of points in a particular direction?
No, but I know that there was a briefing with the ADP chairs today, and those kind of non-state actor inclusion ideas were kind of spread as well. And it certainly came out in the technical expert meetings yesterday that, again, another emphasis on the idea of incorporating non-state actors within it. But there didn't seem to be much kind of go-ahead. Saying that, these are kind of pretty fresh notes. From Federico was in the negotiations this morning, and we can definitely kind of try and collaborate with some of the other people to see some of those clearer kind of directional pictures in terms of where to from here. It's
Yeah,
certainly
it would be really good to get that. Just especially maybe from some of our partners and friends who are following Workstream 2, and understand the wonk speak, and maybe some of the implicit sort of underlying uh, things that are shaping that conversation that maybe we don't see because we're not so deep in it.
sure.
And was that the conversation? Did that happen throughout the day? Did that just wrap literally? Did it go from like 10 to 4 or something?
No, it went from 10 to 1.
Okay. And then what's happened since?
So we had also parallel to that, we had informals on the contact group 3 so informals on the ADP streamlining that weren't open. So we're not exactly sure what's happened then, but I've heard that since the negotiations have started again, so they start at 3. So since they've started again on ADP, there seems to be a little bit of progress in terms of the streamlining process, and so perhaps those informals were quite valuable this morning, but I don't think there's enough yet to say how exactly useful they were. It seems like our partners have had a few wins recently, with a few mentions of health and human rights and gender, and and the like. So potentially that's kind of good for some of our partners, but I don't necessarily know how this afternoon session is going to play out, but it's definitely going to be the most important session of the day.
And you mentioned the attribution text yesterday when you were talking. You suggested that there were going to be sort of two texts. There was going to be this sort of draft text that's like a compilation, and that would be based on what I read. That sounded like that was going to be the Geneva text. And then today you mentioned that the Geneva text is going to have attributions. So does that mean that the treaty is going to be the draft treaty actually is going to be attributed, or are there still sort of two separate document tracks?
Yeah, so it looks like there's still the two, and here we're still kind of just talking the elements. And there was a bit of confusion yesterday when one of the ADP chairs asked to then discuss the Lima call, and as opposed to discussing the Geneva text. So that
It seemed like he was
definitely,
just misspeaking, so that they moved
yeah,
past it, right?
he was just misspeaking, but it confused a few partners as well, a few parties as well. Um, so it definitely seems like there is the intention to have the two run in parallel, and there was a lot of people calling for the attribution, but there was also a lot of people calling against it. So our indication is that the chair is going to release the new text at 8 o'clock tonight, and it's going to be attributed. But that was also mentioned that it was potentially going to be released earlier today and it would be attributed. So we're not exactly sure.
Anybody else have questions?
So if you
I
guys
have
follow
some
on the
questions.
Twitter feeds right now, you'll find that right now a lot of the discussion is around the commitment cycles and things like that. So there's interventions from Japan, there's interventions from the Arab group, there's interventions from Brazil on their different kind of commitment cycles, and it seems like that discussion is going to be quite interesting this afternoon. But again, I'm not so sure if or when we're going to get to new ideas. And for there to be any real progress here, there definitely needs to be some new ideas on the table.
Sounded like Stanley was about to ask something.
Yeah, go for it, Stanley.
Yeah, I read about Federico's article, and he's saying that co-chairs, can we believe them or not? Because it seems like they restart the negotiation in some kind of situation. And I also heard about things the parties say about something that, like, they've done their all their works in Geneva and ready to head back to their another homework. So I'd like to know how's the situation now. Is there any new directions for the negotiation?
So there definitely is. Fede's article was what he's kind of followed and what he feels about the way the chair has gone, and definitely represents some of the frustration at sitting in the negotiating rooms over the last 2 days, where there didn't seem to be much progress at all. My feeling is that being a brand new chair, they didn't want to play their hand too early, and they didn't want parties especially to be suspicious of the new chair, and they wanted a very kind of open, very potentially slow, and very kind of inclusive process. And what they've basically done is they've done that. They've had a very inclusive process where they've basically allowed parties to talk as much as they want. And then when it came to the streamlining, they took the exact same approach. They didn't change methodology at all. They basically said, okay, so far we've just allowed you guys to submit all your ideas on the paragraphs, and now we'd like you to submit your ideas. Us kind of, we have no idea what to do. A few parties by surprise, and that necessarily. That then caused a bit of confusion, and that's basically the little bit of a stick that we've been in the last 2 days. So I guess Federico's article really identifies the fact that he would like the chair to take a more directed approach and give some more direction to the group. However, I can also understand why the chairs would want to leave the group to themselves, not kind of try and confuse anything, not try and push anything that's not party driven right now, and allow things to progress. There's definitely some people in the negotiations who feel that the work of the negotiations has concluded. They've got through a text. They've got a new Geneva text that they're working with, and that text is workable. That can make things move forward. However, there are a lot of other people who are saying we've got 2 days now. We should have had 3 or 4, whereby we can really start to think about how we streamline this text. And in order for that to happen, you'd need a lot of directional leadership from the chair, and it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Even now, parties are still in the same sort of party-driven process. So without that directional leadership, that's definitely what Fede is talking about in terms of going home now, and why are we still here if we're not going to get any kind of push into the right direction of streamlining. So I guess that's the kind of mood that Fede is touching on in this article. So Tina, your icon is like kind of really putting me off here, because you've got this like weird smile thing. It's like I feel like you're halfway through asking a question the whole time. But do you have any other things you'd like me to kind of jump into, or if I can't answer them now, try and track them down over the next couple of hours?
Nothing in particular from me. I think it's just good to get a bit of a general overview of how things are going. So you've done a marvellous job at that.
So what I'm not telling you, and what I'm not able to tell you, is there's been a stakeholder briefing with the ADP chairs right now, in which both kind of Can and Younger were pretty well represented there. So we're definitely going to have some insights from the stakeholder briefing that'll probably be on Can Talk pretty soon, but I'll also be meeting with Younger pretty soon to get a bit of a kind of a personal feeling of how that went. And I'll be able to kind of update you on that. There's also going to be, we're following up on a thematic idea of food security that's been going on here in the talks. So there should be a bit of an update on that either tonight or early tomorrow morning. And we're definitely going to try and have a few funny pieces in the Adopt Negotiator as well, on maybe one on divestment, on Valentine's Day, and we've got a few guest writers potentially for the Valentine's Day piece. So stay tuned for those pieces, but also, especially over the next couple of hours, while we're still in negotiations, let me know if there's anything you want me to track, want me to jump on, want me to get one of the trackers to jump on, because we are in kind of possibly one of the last real debates of the negotiations today. And this week, there was a call from the chair to finish the negotiations at 3 p.m. tomorrow. So if they finish negotiations at 3 p.m. tomorrow, I will have a very strange update for you that will basically say we finished. But let's hope that we get some really substantial progress tonight, and potentially get like a very clear pathway for the future tomorrow morning, and potentially get some real negotiations or some real indications on where to go through from here tomorrow afternoon.
Thanks, Chris. I'd love to put you on to figuring out how the discussion around sort of cycles of ambition and if it's the 5 or 10 year thing, or if it's something else, like why are they discussing that right now? I was under the impression that this afternoon was going to be dedicated to sort of a way forward on mitigation, but I suppose the schedule also said contact group, through like whatever. It was just it wasn't so particular for the rest of the session, so maybe there's room for that. So I'd love to know what that's about, where those conversations are going, maybe whether they're kind of whether parties are digging in because their next tasks are to go home and put together their intended nationally determined contributions for the first quarter of this year. So that work is being done in a lot of places. We heard about support for countries who maybe are earlier on in the process to get that done. And we left Lima with pretty broad guidance, not very clear guidance on what they should include, those contributions, which are going to be the effectively what each country's commitment is under this new sort of post 2020 regime or climate agreement that we're building, right? So I'd love to know if you think that discussion has to do with the INDCs, and will it maybe even influence these contributions that countries are putting together, or if that's more back to the structure of the agreement or the substance of the draft, where those elements are kind of touched on as well. So maybe, yeah, just let me know. I guess I'll have the privilege of reconnecting a little later today. I'll send any other questions or anything specific then. Oh yeah, well that and the workstream 2 thing, which seems like it was a big part of the day. It'd be great to know what people think. Yeah. All right, I'll leave it there. I won't give you any more homework.
Well, it seems like the cycles are getting discussed right now, so if you let me go, I'm going to kind of try and catch up with who I have to catch up with at 4:30, and then I'm going to jump into that discussion so I can get straight onto it, my friend. Tierney, lovely to see your awkwardly smiling face. And Stanley, as always, you've been a stalwart on these calls. It's lovely to have you. And I really hope this is helping you stay connected and helping you kind of, if you are, spread the message in Taiwan.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Stanley.
And,
thanks, Tierney.
Thank you.
Anything major, I'll definitely throw it into the Slack group or throw an email your way. We're not expecting anything too much, but hopefully we will. See you later, guys.
See you later.